In this lesson, we'll be looking at some of the specialist structures used for diffusion, exchange surfaces. The specification has the following to say. Students should be able to explain. In order for living things to absorb materials into their cells, those materials need to be free to move. They need to be either a liquid or a gas, or to be dissolved in water. All organisms rely on diffusion to transport molecules in and out of their cells. The larger an organism becomes, the smaller its surface area to volume ratio becomes. Because of their size, multicellular organisms such as mammals and birds have a far smaller surface area to volume ratio than single-celled organisms. To overcome this problem, they need to use specialist exchange surfaces and organ systems. Exchange surfaces will usually be enlarged and the diffusion gradient enhanced by having thin membranes with short diffusion distances and various ways to maintain a large difference in concentration between the interior and exterior of the absorbing surface. The role of the small intestine in mammals is to absorb food molecules by digesting large insoluble food molecules and converting them to smaller and therefore soluble molecules, which can then diffuse through the cell membranes to be used. The human digestive tract is adapted to increasing the rate of absorption in a number of different ways. Firstly, continuously moving food from the stomach into the intestine to replace any that has been absorbed, and that helps to maintain the concentration gradient. Enzymes are released from the walls of the small intestine, the stomach and the pancreas to break down large insoluble food molecules and therefore increase the concentration of the soluble food molecules at the absorbing surface. There's a good blood supply, and that prevents the concentration of absorbed food molecules building up after absorption. That would reduce the concentration gradient. It's also worth noting at this point that the blood supply also prevents the need for dissolved food molecules to travel by diffusion, which is very slow, to the distant parts of the body. Travelling in the bloodstream is far quicker than travelling by diffusion. The small intestine has a small diameter. It's narrow, and that allows a long length of the intestine to be fitted into the abdominal cavity. Because of the long length, it's increasing the overall surface area available for diffusion. The walls of the small intestine are not smooth. They've got a ridged surface, but that means that it increases the overall surface area available for diffusion. The walls of the small intestine have finger-like projections called villi, and this greatly increases the surface area available for diffusion. The cells lining the exterior of the villi have a brush border of microvilli to increase their surface area. And the cells at the absorbing surface, the villi, are very thin, and that helps to reduce the diffusion distance, and that increases the diffusion gradient. Similarly, the walls of the capillaries in the villi are also very thin. They're one cell thick, and that again decreases the diffusion distance and therefore increases the diffusion gradient. We have developed an exchange system involving our lungs and the blood to exchange gases with our atmosphere and to transport them to and from the cells. Gas exchange in our lungs relies on diffusion. In our lungs, oxygen diffuses into the blood capillaries because of the higher concentration of oxygen in the alveoli compared to the blood. There's more carbon dioxide in our blood than there is in the air in the alveoli, so carbon dioxide will diffuse from the higher concentration in the blood to the lower concentration in the air of the alveoli. The lungs are adapted in the following ways as a gas exchange surface. The concentration gradient is maintained by ventilating the lungs by breathing. Exhaled air still has lots of oxygen available, but frequent breathing helps to replace any absorbed oxygen and remove carbon dioxide from the alveoli. The alveoli are moist, and this helps oxygen to be absorbed and so increases the concentration gradient at the absorbing surface of the alveoli. There's a good blood supply. This provides a fresh supply of blood with low oxygen and high carbon dioxide concentrations to maintain the concentration gradient. Again, it's worth noting that the blood supply prevents the need for dissolved oxygen molecules to travel by diffusion to the distant parts of the body. The cells at the exchange surface, the alveoli, and the blood capillaries are very thin, and this reduces the diffusion distance and therefore increases the diffusion gradient. There are a very large number of alveoli in the lungs, and that massively increases their surface area for absorption. Organs used for gas exchange by diffusion come in two basic types. Externally folded filaments called gills and inwardly folded surfaces called lungs. Gills work well in water because the filaments are supported and held apart from each other by the water, but gills collapse in air and that reduces their effective surface area. In some organisms, mainly amphibians, the gills are exposed to the environment. Fish gills are mainly inside their mouth and covered by a bony gill cover called an operculum. Having gills inside their mouth allows for water to be forced to flow over the gills. When the mouth is opened and the gill covers are closed, water is sucked in and flows through the gills. When the mouth is closed and the gill covers are opened, the same water continues to flow over the gills. Keeping the gills well ventilated with water maintains a diffusion gradient by keeping the high concentration of oxygen in the water at a high level. The surface area of the gills is increased by having lots of filaments. There are also lots of small flaps of tissue called lamellae on each filament, and that further increases the surface area. Like human lungs, the gills of fish have a very thin layer of tissue at their surface to reduce the diffusion distance. Having a short diffusion distance increases the diffusion gradient for oxygen uptake. Fish gills also have a very good blood supply, and a good blood supply removes oxygen as soon as it's absorbed, which maintains the concentration gradient. Unlike human lungs, fish gills usually have a unidirectional flow across them, Now this is important because it allows blood to flow continuously in the opposite direction to the water. That's known as a countercurrent flow. And a countercurrent flow is more efficient at absorbing than systems where the flow is sometimes in the same direction. Human lungs have air flowing in and out, so a continuous countercurrent flow isn't possible. Now, birds aren't on the specification, but it's interesting to note that birds have a different arrangement of the air sacs inside their abdomen, and they are able to have a countercurrent flow of air over their absorbing surface. Moving on to plants. As multicellular organisms, plants have the same need as animals to overcome the problem of a reduced surface area to volume ratio due to their large size. Plants are sessile. They don't wander about. Because of this, their metabolism is far slower than animals, and they don't need to supply their cells at the same rate as animals do. As their needs are less demanding than those of mammals and fish, plants don't need to use resources to power a circulatory system. But this means they're also less able to maintain the concentration gradients at their exchange surfaces. In relation to exchange surfaces, the purpose of leaves is mainly to absorb carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. And light, of course. Absorbing carbon dioxide reduces its concentration, and this sets up a diffusion gradient to absorb more carbon dioxide. Photosynthesis also gives off oxygen, which increases the concentration in the leaf compared to the air. So oxygen diffuses out of the leaf and into the surrounding air. Now, as living things, plants also respire, and the movement of gases due to respiration is the opposite of those due to photosynthesis. So the overall movement of gases, considering both photosynthesis and respiration, the overall movement of gases through the leaf will depend upon the extent of these two opposing processes. The balance between these opposite processes will change throughout the day as light levels change. The leaf has a flat shape to increase the amount of surface area exposed for gas exchange and absorbing sunlight. Leaves have air spaces within the spongy mesophyll to increase the surface area within the leaf which is available for diffusion. The surface of the spongy mesophyll cells are moist, and this helps carbon dioxide to be absorbed and so increases the concentration gradient at the absorbing surface. It's worth noting that allowing this water to evaporate into the leaf space and out of the leaf is important for the transport of mineral-rich water from the roots. That's the transpiration stream. The cells are close to xylem cells to supply water to keep the absorbing surface moist. The lower surface of the leaf has pores called stomata, and these allow air to diffuse in and out. The stomata have guard cells, and they are to close the stomata when water vapor loss is too great. In relation to exchange surfaces, the purpose of plant roots is to absorb water and mineral ions from the soil. Roots have a large number of extensions to reach into the soil and therefore provide a large surface area for absorbing. And the root hair cells have got thin filaments extending into the soil to provide an even larger surface area available for absorption. The cells at the exchange surface, that's the root hair cells, have a thin cell wall and no waxy cuticle. This reduces the diffusion distance and therefore increases the diffusion gradient. The root hair cells have a large permanent vacuole, and that allows them to absorb large amounts of water when available. Root hair cells are close to the xylem cells, and that allows absorbed water and mineral ions to be moved away from the absorbing surface and to the rest of the plant. This reduces the concentration at the root hair cells and therefore maintains the diffusion gradient for absorption. Root hair cells have large numbers of mitochondria for aerobic respiration, and that's to provide the energy needed for active transport of mineral ions, and that's against the concentration gradient. In summary, large organisms have problems with diffusion into their cells due to their reduced surface area to volume ratio. They overcome this with specialist absorbing surfaces with the following features: a large surface area, a thin absorbing surface, a good blood supply in animals, good ventilation in animals, and a countercurrent blood flow in fish and birds, but not in mammals. Don't forget to download the resources for this video from the link in the description, especially the notes template. LearnFix has a lot more to offer than just the videos and the exam questions. The most popular aspect is the set of 12 online learning games we have for each topic. These help you practice your recall of the details. Now, when it comes to revision, LearnFix is there to help. After each section of the syllabus, there's a diagnostic quiz to help focus your revision efforts. You can then use a progress report to look back at the details for that particular topic, what went well and what needs more work. We're adding new features every month, so visit us at learnfix.com to find out more.